Cairo's Nasser City district is jammed this hour with supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. They're calling for him to be reinstated, along with the rest of his Muslim Brotherhood government. Egypt's army removed them from power on Wednesday. Now, some of those protesters are marching towards Tahrir Square, 25 kilometers away. Thousands of Morsi's backers have held rallies around the country today. The main one at a mosque in Nasser City began after morning prayers. In another part of town, as many as 3 people were killed when the army shot at protesters outside the Republican Guard headquarters. Witnesses say soldiers began firing when a crowd surged on the facility, ignoring orders to stay back. A number of protesters were injured, and some appear to have been shot by small pellet fire. The health ministry says at least 6 people have died in clashes across the country. For more on the day's developments, I'm joined by Nala Ayed in Cairo. So, Nala, what's it like to be in the middle of all of this tonight?
Well, Andrew, I was kind of trying to think back to 2011 to try to remember what some of the strangest days we had during then, and there were some pretty strange days. This has got to be one of the, it must best those days back in 2011. There's all kinds of stuff going on and so much tension, Andrew. You could feel it. I mean, there are thousands of people still in Tahrir Square, as you see, sort of that a crowd that has ebbed and flowed throughout the day, depending on what was going on. Constantly, all day, there have been Apaches in the sky going around and around from this part of town to the part of town where the pro-Morsi supporters have been. And there are tanks in several parts of this city blocking the protesters. They're trying to keep protesters from both sides away from each other. So it's an extraordinary day, Andrew, and it's certainly, there's a lot of anger, a lot of confusion, and a lot of, I would say, a little bit of apprehension, because, as you mentioned, there has been some violence, but it hasn't, and there certainly has been some clashes as well. In fact, not too far from here, on a couple of bridges, the anti and pro-Morsi side clashing with each other, using what is available to them, things like fireworks and Molotov cocktails and stones and sticks. And so that's as far as it's gotten on that front. But a lot of tension and a lot of concern about whether it might get beyond what it is now.
And Nala, you spoke with some of Morsi's supporters. What are they saying?
Well, we spent a good chunk of time with them earlier around Friday prayers time, midday, and we spoke to several people who welcomed the chance to talk to us because they said that their own networks are off the air now and wanted to get their message across to the world. Of course, as you remember from yesterday too, the assertion there is that there is no doubt in their minds that what's happened here is a military coup, and that the outside world should condemn this because they said they were defending democracy, legitimacy of the vote for Mohamed Morsi. Now, they have maintained, almost everybody I spoke to maintained, that they will remain in that square and several other locations around the country until their president is restored. And I'll tell you, there was that crowd was galvanized when the supreme guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, who had been arrested but has been released as far as we know, appeared on the stage at that very crowd and echoed that very message, saying that Mohamed Morsi was the rightful president and that they would defend him as far as it takes to get him back to his position.
And now there have actually also been some political developments, but is anyone in that crowd behind you paying attention to that today?
Well, not this crowd and not the other crowd either, both of which we've gotten to know now, really are paying much attention. And in fact, we see that even in some of the commentary, both online and in person. People are more paying attention to what's happening on the ground, because that's what the immediate effect is. There are people, residents nearby, who really have nothing to do with any of this, but who came down to the street to defend their area, you know, picked up stones and sticks to fight, I guess, the onslaught of pro-Morsi supporters who came to the area. So that's the kind of thing people are interested in right now. They're not really paying attention to the process. It's those jets in the sky, the Apaches in the sky, and what's happening on the ground.
And now let's talk a little bit about where you are. where Nasser City is and some of the concerns about the mixing of both pro-Morsi supporters and the anti-Morsi supporters, because from what I understand, there's the 6th of October bridge, so it's you can describe it better than I can, but it's about 25 kilometers away, so that's a good distance. But the concern is that these groups are going to come too close together, right?
Absolutely, and I think the aim was from the beginning for the Army and the Interior Ministry is to ensure that those sides stay as far away as possible. And if you listen to some of the local networks and some of the messages being sent back and forth, there are a lot of people who have called their own supporters, their own people, and said, or called on their own supporters, saying, stay away from the other side. We don't want to be the instigators of violence. We don't want to make this into a possible civil war, and although that's a strong word for what's going on right now, obviously. So there's been a lot of advice out there for people on each side telling each other to stay away, but inevitably, as you might expect, Andrew, that emotions are running high, a lot of anger on the streets, and even small groups. I mean, what's going on that bridge is not two massive groups of protesters. There are two defined groups, I mean, in the hundreds, who have, come face to face. And the anti-Morsis say that it was the pro-Morsis who came over, that they had no business being in this area, so they went out to defend against them. The other thing we're hearing a lot about is the anti-Morsis here being quite upset that no one's here to really protect them. There are tanks nearby to try to prevent the pro-Morsis from coming over one particular bridge, but not another. And they're saying, why is that? Why aren't the riot police out? Why isn't the army out there? And is it enough to have those Apaches in the sky? So far, it hasn't been.
All right, now, before we let you go, let's it really is quite a contrast as I look behind you. And if we can, again, just go full frame on Nala and get you to describe, because the other day, on Wednesday, just 2 days ago, you were describing what looked, the fireworks celebration. There were Egyptian flags being thrown from the helicopter. The crowd seemed jubilant. It just doesn't have that feel tonight.
No, it doesn't, Andrew. A few hours ago, there was a shadow of that, an echo of that celebration. There were some fireworks, there was some music, and the numbers were growing because, in fact, those anti-Morsi supporters were calling on their people to come back to Tahrir to show, as a show of strength, to counter the protest that's happening on the other side of the city, in the eastern part of the city, in Nasser City. And so there were more numbers, but then at some point when the clashes began, Tahrir almost emptied out. There were all kinds of people who went towards the clashes to try to, I guess, to participate and to try to head off any advance by the pro-Morsi side, because the impression is that they would like to come and take over Tahrir Square, which of course would be symbolically important for them. So now, just now in the last hour, the more people have arrived at Tahrir, obviously for that reason, to show, as a show of strength. And there have been calls from that side for even bigger protests on Sunday to counter what is going on today. And
finally, Nala, what is your sense, and this may be a difficult question because it is, as you say, a very strange evening in Cairo, but what is your sense at how effective the military will be at keeping, other than that scuffle with a few hundred defined groups, as you mentioned, on the 6th of October bridge, but of keeping both pro-Morsi supporters and anti-Morsi supporters apart?
I would say we haven't seen what the army is capable of yet, and we have not seen what the Interior Ministry, the riot police, are capable of yet. I think it seems, in my estimate, because I've seen them go beyond this point, in my estimate, they seem to be quite restrained at the moment, with the exception, of course, of that shooting that happened earlier. If indeed it was from the army, that's an exception. But beyond that, it seems that they are holding back, that they are just sort of watching and waiting. I think if things get worse, that there is a lot more they could do to try to keep the two sides apart, or maybe to get everybody to just go home.
Nala, thank you very much once again. That is the CBC's Nala Ayed reporting from Cairo, and we are going to stay on top of the story throughout the afternoon for you, and we'll go back to Nala as soon as we can.